And so this evening, we welcome once again Barry Broman, who last spoke to the club on the 6th of December in 2017 with his theory on who killed Jim Thompson. And it was a fun evening. The place was absolutely filled out. I'm not sure we were entirely convinced, but anyway, it was a good program. Barry is a graduate of the University of Washington in political science and Southeast Asian studies, and he first came to Asia in 1962 as an Associated Press photographer covering Thailand, Cambodia, and South Vietnam. He was a member of the FCCT at that time. The FCCT dates from about 1956, and he rejoined in the 1970s. In between, he served as an infantry officer in the Marine Corps during the Vietnam War and was a liaison officer in Bangkok. And he went on to a 26-year career in the Central Intelligence Agency with postings in Cambodia, Thailand, Indonesia, France, and lastly, Myanmar, Burma, as we all know. And he retired relatively young. You would have been 53 in 1996. And turned his hand more seriously, because he'd already been involved in it, to writing and photography. And he's written or photographed more than a dozen books on Asian themes, including Old Homes of Bangkok and Spiritual Abodes of Thailand. Those were written with William Warren, who was a great fixture of the literary scene here. And he's also, along the way, produced nearly a dozen documentaries, including Burma, A Human Tragedy. Now, this is where it all gets quite complicated. Last year, he published a memoir, Indochina Hand, Tales of a CIA Case Officer, and that's the second in a trilogy and set in Thailand and in Cambodia in the early 1990s. And it's basically a compilation of 62 short stories, most of them drawing on true stories, of course. And then he's also been writing a 3-part memoir, so there's an awful lot of stuff. And I keep getting emails from him saying, Langley has just cleared this latest publication, so it's all tremendously exciting. And I'm hoping that you're going to tell us what you haven't been allowed to write, or at least hint at it. No? Okay, well, we'll have a go at that later.
I don't kiss and tell.
You don't kiss and tell. Okay, so look, why don't you just give us a quick background yourself, and then we'll have a chat, and then we'll bring the whole audience in.
Okay, good. Hear me okay? I'm very happy to be back in Bangkok. I'm always happy to be in Bangkok, where I lived off and on for over 9 years. I haven't been back for the last couple of years. I live in Washington State. The Seahawks won. I'm happy to report the Seattle Seahawks football team won the national championship. I was up watching that at 6 a.m. this morning. It was no surprise to me, but it's only the second time we've ever won the national championship. So let's go Seahawks. So I was kindly invited to be here this evening to talk about some of my recent books, and some of which I have some copies that are for sale. There aren't many, and if they are sold out, and if anybody wants one, they're available through Amazon and Kindle. Excuse me. But I have book plates here. If you didn't get a book here, I will sign the book for you, give it to you, and when you buy the book, you can paste it in, and you've got a signed copy. That's what book plates are all about. Now, a little bit about my background. Dominic pretty much said what I was going to say, but I can amplify a bit. I was what we call a military brat, in that my father was a military officer and followed the flag for a long time, and I followed along with him. And it's been my experience that when you're a military brat, you either benefit greatly or you don't, and it's a bad experience because you're moving, you lose your friends, and this and that. I like being a military brat. I like moving around. And my father did me 2 great services. He got a posting to England. My dad was an architect from University of Washington. And in World War II, he was a glider pilot. And he served in England, France, and he crossed the Rhine, the largest military air operation, varsity, 1945, crossing the Rhine. He was in it. And he was in and out of the Air Force because he was getting called back for various wars. And in 1954, the Air Force said, you have your choice of any place in the world. And he chose to be the base engineer for RAF Manston. It's a beautiful little Battle of Britain base on the English Channel, not far from Dover, not far from Canterbury. So I was in an English boys' school for 3 years, the only American, and I benefited greatly. It widened my whole scope of the world, taught me to play cricket, which benefited me in Bangkok because that's how I got a membership into the sports club to be on the cricket team in 1975. So the second thing my dad did that was memorable for me, in '62, he was assigned to Thailand as a civil engineer advisor to the Thai Air Force. At the time, they were building runways. The largest airstrip on the mainland of Southeast Asia, I think still, is Utapao. It's one of his projects. And he allowed me to drop out of university for 1 year and come out to Thailand to get some experience in Asia. At the time, I was going to be a specialist of Latin America. I spoke Spanish quite well. Came to Bangkok in '62, and after 2 weeks, I decided I was going to become a Southeast Asia specialist, and I never looked back. When I went back to university, I majored in Asian studies, took Thai language, got a master's degree, and like we all had to do in those days, I was in the military. I chose the Marine Corps. Don't ask me why. Well, first of all, I was in Navy Reserve Officer training, and there was an option for Marine Corps. When I learned that there were no women or alcohol on U.S. Navy ships, I took the Marine Corps option, and I benefited for that. So while in graduate school, one of my professors asked if I'd ever thought about working for the Central Intelligence Agency. And I had no knowledge or interest in the agency. But because I was getting a master's, I had Thai language, I had Thai experience. I agreed to an interview, and it went well. And this chap at the end said, look, with a master's, you can be an operations officer in the field, or you could be an analyst in Washington. And I said, well, if I went that way, I would only go to serve in Asia, because that's where I want to make my career. So we said that could be arranged. And I said, but remember, I'm a lieutenant at the time in the Marine Corps. The Marines let me stay for a master's degree. I said, I'm going to go to war next month, or in a few months. And he said, okay. If you live, call this number 6 months before you get out of the Marine Corps. And I went off to war. I was an infantry officer. I extended my tour in Vietnam because I was offered a job to come to Bangkok as a liaison officer. In the R&R program, you might remember the R&R program. It was a big deal for troops. Everybody got a 6-week paid vacation during their tour in Vietnam. And the most popular and productive site was Bangkok. And each site had a liaison officer from Vietnam to keep an eye on how the money was spent in Bangkok by the U.S. Army, usually, not by, we were treated very, very well by the Thai government at that time. it was the best, most productive program was in Thailand. But anyway, I came back to Bangkok for that and finished my time in the Corps and went straight into the agency. I called that number that this chap had given me and not expecting any results. He said, "Let me get your file." I had a file. And then he said, "Okay, I'll meet you in the Coronado Hotel in San Diego." I was in Camp Pendleton, California. And he signed me up. And so I had 2 weeks between the Marine Corps and the CIA, and I spent the next 26 years in the agency. And I chose to go into operations. And I enjoyed a lot of it, not all of it, most of it. And my first posting was Cambodia during the war. I was there till it fell, the week it fell in 75. And I came over to Thailand and followed Cambodia from Thailand for a few years. And then went on to Paris for 3 years, working on Asian targets and heavily on Cambodia. I have a lot of background on Cambodia. So back to Bangkok again in '90, helping the Cambodians with the considerable assistance of the Royal Thai Army, helping the Khmer resistance fight the Vietnamese installed puppet government of the PRK in Phnom Penh. That was 90 to 91. Then I got involved in counter-narcotics, again with, in this case, the Thai police, very profitable. Our first bust, because I'd known this old colonel, police colonel, back in the 70s. He was a very senior officer in the 90s, and when I started working the narcotics target. And he put together a team to support his interest in taking down major drug traffickers. And the first operation we did together, we captured 551 kilos of heroin, number 4 heroin from Khun Sa. The biggest bust, I believe, well, up till that time, ever, and probably never exceeded. And this is an example of how we work in tandem with allied countries to our mutual benefit. So tonight, I would like to talk a little bit about 4 books. I brought 4 books along with me for sale. They're probably, well, I suspect they're going to be sold, but there's 2 memoirs and 2 novels. The memoirs, the first one is called Risk Taker, Spy Maker, Tales of a CIA Case Officer. And I have to stop at that point because in looking at the blurb announcing my appearance here, it said Barry Broman, spy and writer. Okay, that's not quite true. We make spies, we aren't spies. Okay, that's why the title of the book was Risk Taker, Spy Maker. And it's very often incorrect when people say he's a spy. Now, it is true that a case officer can be a spy when he gets recruited by the opposition, okay? Then he's a spy and a traitor in addition, and that happens, but it's relatively rare. So we like to think of ourselves as case officers, not spies. Same goes for the term agent. Say you're a CIA agent. No. I hire agents. I'm a case officer, okay? Now, it gets more confusing. If I'm in the FBI, I'm a special agent. But in the CIA, no. We hire agents. So, the first memoir was just a story of my time in England and the time in when my dad let me take a year off to come to Thailand, he didn't realize that I would fall in love with tennis at the Royal Bangkok Sports Club by day and party all night by night. And after 2 weeks, he said, this isn't quite what I had in mind. If you don't get a job, you're going back to college in the fall. I had very limited skills at that time, but as a freshman at University of Illinois, I learned photography, and I worked for the newspaper. So armed with some clippings, I went down to the Associated Press office, 103 Pat Pong Road, and announced that I was ready to start a career in journalism. And the bureau chief looked at me, Tony Escoda, great guy, Filipino, Yale and Columbia universities. He flipped through my pretty pathetic dossier, and he said, can you go to Laos tomorrow? And the rest is history. I was the AP photographer, age 19, with assignments to Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos, and I never looked back. So that was my first encounter with Asia, and it was actually I was gonna make a career of the AP. I'd worked with them, for them in the summers. But out of nowhere came the agency, and I couldn't say no, and I don't regret it. So the second memoir, the first memoir is just it's a memoir like they're always, my career. But the second book is a standalone 62 stories. Some deal with the agency and some deal with other things, AP, whatnot, Marine Corps, whatnot. Then I started writing novels. I retired from government in '96 and started writing books. Mostly I started with photo books, a lot on Burma, some in Thailand, and photos. I mean, the documentary films, I've done 9 of them. The most recent one was Who Killed Jim Thompson? And for those of you who don't know, and I'm fairly confident I'm correct on this, the Malaysian Communist Party killed him. And it was a series of missteps, partly on Jim's part and mostly on their part, but that's what happened to Jim. So then I started writing novels. Now my novels, just finished a trilogy, and they follow my career in fiction, but these are historical fiction. There's a lot of truth in them, but I find it very liberating writing fiction, and it's also a lot easier to get my books approved by the CIA if it's fiction than nonfiction, because they do a lot more digging into nonfiction. So the first one is based in Paris, where I served in the 80s. And one of the main characters is a young Thai fashion designer who gets involved with the agency in pursuit of a Soviet diplomat. And most of my characters, whether they're agency or agents, are based on real people, because I don't have such a vivid imagination to make this stuff up. I just take it out of, and I've met a lot of interesting and characters in my career, and I'm writing about them. So the first book takes place in Paris. I brought a few copies tonight, because you really ought to read these things in order, but it's not mandatory. Second one is The Spy from Sukhumvit Road. I brought some copies of that. That's in 1990, 91, in support of the Khmer resistance. And the third novel I just published 2 weeks ago. I didn't have any copies. It takes place in Burma, going after major drug traffickers. And I'm working on another book. Be a photo memoir because I was a photographer, and it'll be Vietnam and 2 Cambodian wars. So that's in the editing process right now. And that's kind of what I've been doing recently. Are there any?
Yeah, so we had lunch together today, and Barry said, you know, I'm not a spy really. And
Nor was I ever.
he would say that, wouldn't he? But basically, we've been through a lot of anecdotes lately, some of which are truly amazing. So the tale of Khao Pravi Han in '63, when you were a photographer with Horst Fass,
Yeah.
and the court verdict, the ICJ ruled in favor of Cambodia.
Right,
And then Sihanouk built a staircase up the cliff, is
Right.
that not correct?
right,
And had a party,
right.
and you were there, so what happened?
No, I wasn't there. I wanted to be
Oh,
there.
you weren't there, okay.
But my boss, German photographer Horst Fass, 2 Pulitzer Prizes, tremendous guy, he went. He was the staff photographer in Saigon. But he told me the story I'll tell you now.
Right.
So, as Dominic said, Cambodia won a world court decision on who owned the temple, Khao Pravi Han, or Priya Vihir, as the Khmer say. And I think the Khmer were smart, Sihanouk was smart when he hired Dean Acheson, former Secretary of State, to represent Cambodia and the one. So you've got this little temple on the top of a cliff, really only approached easily from the Thai side. And in '63, Prince Sihanouk organized an event at Khao Pravi Han in which he had an airstrip built, take small aircraft, because no real roads in and out, didn't want to travel through Thailand, and built a staircase up. And I've been up there. It's dangerous and difficult. And then Oregon had brought in thousands of guests and food and entertainment, the ballet. I mean, it was a big deal, and Horst loved it. And they were there for a few days, but he tells the story, or told me the story of climbing up. All these diplomats and guests had to climb up this dangerous ladder to get into the temple site. And the Russian ambassador dropped dead at the end. And Fass says, Sihanouk stepped over the body and just kept it on with his tour, directing the tour of temple site. And then there was a big party that night. Maybe well, what the hell. So Horst spotted a very attractive lady in this group, and we're talking hundreds of people, Asian woman or métisse. And he made his move on her, and she said, listen, my husband wouldn't really appreciate it if I went off with you later tonight. And Horst didn't know who she was and said, is your husband here? And she said, yes, that's him over there. It's Prince Sihanouk. This was Monique, the first lady. And she took it in the gentle, accepting way. She was a former beauty queen. Monique was, her father was Italian, mother was Khmer. Beautiful, beautiful lady.
Queen Moninette, yeah, is her name.
Sorry?
Moninette is, Monique is the Europeanized version. But anyway, so Horst is very much in the news at the moment because of this whole issue with the Napalm Girl and the decision that he took in '72 to possibly change the credit. So it's a big controversy. It's a very interesting story. He's an amazing character. He actually got you shot at twice. Is that correct?
Well, no, he didn't get
He didn't
me
shoot
shot
you,
at.
but
The first time I was shot at was 1963 in South Vietnam with Horst Voss, and he took me out down in the Delta, and I was photographing an American aircraft carrier coming up the river with helicopters on the deck, and Voss thought it would be good to get a long shot across rice paddies. And he found this old French watchtower that had been blown up, probably in 51 or 52. And it looked very fragile. So he said, Barry, you go up and take my camera with the long lens and get that shot. So I weighed about 150 pounds less than Horst, and so I went up, and I could see the carrier in the distance. It was a good long shot, and click, click, and the carrier's moving slowly up the river, and I hear pop, 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 pop. I said, what's that, Horst? He said, that's the Viet Cong. But they can't shoot. Okay, they're far away. Just then, bing, right off the metal next to me. I said, here's your camera, Horst. Dropped the camera down. We made it out back to town, and I had my first Vietnam credit for the AP. That was 63. 74, I was in Phnom Penh in the embassy, and Horst came to town from Saigon, and he wanted to go out to the front, which in Cambodia wasn't difficult because we were surrounded. You could go out any one of 5 roads and run into the Khmer Rouge. Sometimes it would take an hour or two, sometimes it would take a day or so. So in this case, we went down Highway 4, which went west out of Phnom Penh, and we ran into a firefight about 45 minutes from Phnom Penh. And we got up, we had a car and driver, and we got out, and there was a mortar squad firing. We took some pictures, and then I went over and talked to the battalion commander to get a little brief on what was happening and the plans and whatnot. And then we were shelled by enemy mortars. We were firing, or the Khmer were firing 81s out. We were getting 82 millimeters coming in. And that was a mess. And so Foss said, okay, that's enough for today. We'll go back and put those on the wire. And Dennis Gray was there with AP, and that was the last time I was shot at with Horst.
So we've established that there isn't a linear connection between working for AP as a photographic stringer and becoming part of the CIA. These are two. This is part of your story, but there's not a connection actually.
Absolutely not.
Just for the record.
Well, for the record, the CIA does not use American journalists. They don't recruit them, and they don't share time with them. Now, I'm a bit of a unusual. Most of my CIA buddies see a journalist anywhere, they run. Okay, they run away because journalists have this habit of asking questions that we don't want to answer. Okay, and so in my case, we do use non-American journalists as operations assets from time to time, and that's mutually beneficial, the way I look at it.
But not Americans.
Not Americans, no.
Right.
Or American organizations. You know, if you're a Frenchman working for AP, that's an American organization, or American citizen. But if an American citizen is working for a foreign entity, it's okay.
So you're in the background, you make a big point of saying that you're not a field spy, but
Right.
But you're a manager. you're managing the cases.
Well, we call that running them. We
Okay.
run agents.
Okay, so
Or we handle, but run is the better.
so you have this decades-long career, and whilst you were operating, as you've just described, what was your idea of what you were doing? What was your framework, your ideology?
Well, when you go after recruits, they have to have access to secret information that is of use to the U.S. government, whether it's strategic or tactical. A hard target is typically someone who's a communist, Russian in those days, or Chinese, or North Koreans. Those are hard targets. And there's I worked on an operation with MI6, British External Intelligence, once, and I was, the chap I was working with, we were in pursuit of a hard target. And we were working very closely for about 3 weeks in pursuit of this target, who we actually recruited at the end of the time. And this old Brit taught me a lot in this short period of time. And one of the things he taught me was, in this business, we're in the business of making dreams come true, okay? The target, Russian, let's say, he has a dream, whether it's to have a lot of money, or get out, or have his kids educated in the West. They have dreams. And very often we're in a position to make those dreams come true. But you kind of have to work your bolt to get your dreams come true. And that means provide clandestine intelligence to do it. That's how it works. Now, the Russians, they have different techniques than we do. They're big on blackmail. You get some dirt on someone. This is ripped from the headlines.
Very topical, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. It is indeed. Now I don't want to name names, but they'll get dirt on someone and they'll blackmail them. Now the agency doesn't do that. You might not believe that, but trust me. Okay, trust me. It's not part of our MO. Which isn't to say, listen, in my first my first novel, where this Russian is recruited in Paris with the help of this Thai access agent, we would call him, to develop this Russian. Once it becomes clear what the CIA is doing here, you have to ask the question, is this ethical to do this kind of thing? But in this case, where we're not, at no point would we put this Russian at risk. He happens to be homosexual, okay? This is in the 80s. And it's a vulnerability on both sides. If you have a gay American in government, it was against the law. And so this was something the Russians were very eager to pursue, people like that. In this case, the Russian is gay, and rather than blackmail the guy, what finally persuaded him to come across was the fact that he would have his dream was to be in the West, and in fact to be in the West with this young Thai. This is fiction, folks. This is fiction. Okay, trust me. But it worked out that way. It worked out happily.
So blackmail.
We don't do that.
Yeah, okay, but it's in the mix.
Oh yeah, it's
and what
it's
about
famous.
we hear about all the dirty tricks and in Cuba exploding cigars and all that kind of stuff. I mean, were you involved in that kind of
Well, no.
Spycraft?
That isn't spycraft. I think that there were probably, the CIA came out of the OSS, World War II. And these were young, mostly Ivy League guys, breaking new ground. The U.S. did not have an intelligence agency before the CIA. That OSS was primarily sabotage behind enemy lines. The biggest and, in my opinion, the most successful operation OSS ever ran in the war was in Burma, where you had a handful of young officers, including missionaries, American missionaries. Now, these days, the agency does not work with missionaries, okay? It's just, it's not a law, it's a regulation, and we don't use missionaries. But in World War II, we had missionaries in Burma and in northern Thailand working with ethnic minorities. And in Burma, it was the Kachin in the northern part of Burma who were mostly Christian. There were missionaries around, and they'd also served in the British Army in World War I. They were sort of tough little mountain guys, kind of like Gurkhas in Nepal. In any case, that operation, by the end of the war, there were 10,000 Kachin Rangers recruited by the OSS to fight against the Japanese. And they also rescued hundreds of downed pilots flying the hump from India into China over the Himalaya. And so that was the forerunner and the military side. But they also were recruiting people, running agents. But the OSS came out of Churchill talking to Franklin Roosevelt and telling him what they were doing in Europe with SOE, Special Operations Executive, which in Southeast Asia was Force 136, British, same idea. And they trained the Americans in Europe and Southeast Asia.
And what about the secret wars in Laos and Air America and all those sorts of activities?
Well, okay. The Laos situation was really, and the involvement of the agency in Laos was a function of the Vietnamese, or North Vietnamese, infiltrating through Laos into South Vietnam. And the American president, whether it was, I don't think Kennedy was dead, so it would have been after Kennedy. The word was, we will not violate Lao neutrality by putting U.S. military in. The fact that there were 85,000 North Vietnamese in Laos running this Ho Chi Minh Trail, network of trails down south, that wasn't figured into the equation. Their neutrality was already violated. So the response was to arm and support or recruit Lao minorities, Hmong primarily, but Yao and some others. And this was done with the help, I would say, without breaking any rules, with support of the Royal Thai Army and police, border patrol and whatnot. So that's why that happened. And those of us who were in the war, especially along the border where I was, it was insane not to go into Laos. It was actually LBJ Johnson said, no, we're not going to go across. But really, if we'd gone across for Khe Sanh, there's an old French road from the ocean to the Lao border, Highway 9, and then into Laos, and all the way to the Mekong, the Thai border. If we'd done that, it would have changed things, because at one point there were 21 divisions in the North Vietnamese Army, and 19 of them were in the south. And if you cut the road and the resupply, it would have upset them. Did that answer your question?
No, well, sort of middling.
Well, keep going.
But, well, yes, I'm intrigued because, I mean, the whole modus operandi is in the shadows, that you don't play your hand
Well,
overtly.
that's where we want it.
Yeah, but that's the whole point. I mean, isn't that very frustrating that you can never claim credit for something that
Well,
maybe
that's okay. That's part of
deserves
the
a bit?
game.
You don't mind that? There's this sort of
No,
heroic
no,
anonymity.
you know, I've run, well, I won't go into details, but what we don't want is public credit, you know, for something, big operation, for instance. I remember running a very successful narcotics operation, and with the Thai police, and the Thai general I was working with said, you know, after this bust, I mentioned, you know, our picture's going to be on the front page of the Bangkok Post. And I said, well, yours is, and I want the guy next to you to be the DEA chief, okay, the Drug Enforcement Administration. These are the narcs. These are the guys that's all they do is narcotics. And very often there's bad blood between them and the agency because they're cops. They arrest people and put them in jail. CIA, we recruit people, bad people, and run them, you know, and for years. And, you know, we're in the business of getting information and not putting people in jail. So it's a culture problem right there. Same with the FBI. They'd rather arrest people than find out, you know, go up the chain. Anyway, that's a hardy
But, I mean,
problem.
you must be itching to record some of these stories simply as a storyteller. I mean, that they're
Well,
so
yeah.
good, they're so interesting.
Yeah, and that's where fiction comes in.
Yeah, okay, so we should pay more attention to the fiction than the memoir.
Sometimes that's one way to do it. Some stories should not be told. You know, in these novels, in my memoirs, the sad fact is some of the really interesting stuff isn't there. It won't be there. It shouldn't be there. It should not be told.
But why not? I mean, doesn't there come a point where, you know, official secrets can be lifted?
I think,
Why
yeah, I
is there a
think there's
need for constant secrecy?
Well, certainly when we're talking about personalities and names, you know, those names should not be revealed.
At risk, yeah, that's a different issue.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but then there's the idea of, you know, a really nifty little ploy. I mean, several times I've been tempted to, you know, talk about this in a novel, but I give it away. Then it would be out there, you know, and say, wow, you know, that's great. I don't want them to know.
All right, but I mean, if you don't take credit, that's
Right.
one issue. But also, there's the whole issue of accountability. So the idea that everything works wonderfully. There have been disasters, have there not? Bay of Pigs, Chile was a mess. You can think of lots of examples.
Well, that's true. Bay of Pigs. I don't want to get into the Cuba thing. I wasn't there. It was before my time. But the agency did not want to get involved in Cuba, did not want to get involved in a paramilitary operation, and did not want to invade or do this. The president said, do it. And the president was Kennedy. And so the agency, you know, the CIA has a number of hats, and one of them is paramilitary and other things, apart from just collecting intelligence. And they very reluctantly got involved in Cuba, and at the last minute, after the landings had taken place, they backed. Jack Kennedy and his brother lost their nerve and did not follow through with the initial plan, and it ended up as a disaster. And these things happen.
You finished with the CIA in '96. You told me that you had a little bit of involvement in the early part of the century, post 9/11. Can you?
I think what I think I said was my best recruitment. I was primarily known as a recruiter or a headhunter,
Right.
and when we were chatting, I mentioned that my best recruitment came after I retired. It's a freebie for the agency because I had met this chap who I said to myself, this guy is incredible. If his access to intelligence is as good as I think it is, then he should pursue it. And I got him to agree, knowing that I wasn't active anymore. I said, we really could use a guy like you, but it's dangerous. Okay, this is a hard target, and you have to understand that your life is at risk. And he said, yeah, but I like the idea, and so I recruited him and turned him over to the agency, and the case ran for years. It's over now. He's still alive, but he's safe. And at some point, I think it'd be nice if people could know about it, but I'm not the guy that's going to tell.
Can you say anything about, I know it's not your period, but anything about the involvement in the war in Iraq post 9/11? You were saying that the CIA assessment was that Saddam did not have weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah, I was in Washington, D.C. briefly in, I think, 2003, and the agency contacted me, a guy who I knew. I was a senior officer. And he said, look, come out to headquarters for lunch, and he wanted to chat. So he wanted to chat about Burma. I was doing films and stuff in Burma, and I was happy to answer his questions. Not really intel stuff, but Burma's a difficult place, as you well know, and whatnot. And my last posting, I was chief of station in Rangoon, so I had some connections there. And so I answered his questions, and he was happy. Then I asked him, are we going to go to war in Iraq? Because this was at that period. And he said, oh yeah, we're going to war. There's no question. The president has a problem of justifying going to war because the president asked the agency, is there evidence of weapons of mass destruction or Iraqi participation in, stuff going on in the Middle East against our interests? And the agency didn't have the information. And later, I think it was determined they didn't have it because there wasn't any. There weren't weapons of mass destruction, and Saddam Hussein wasn't involved in these other things. But the president and the neocons that were, running him wanted a war. And the agency, it was put at the time as a failure of intelligence because they didn't have the information. There wasn't any. He wasn't guilty of that. So that was a war that should not have happened.
Yeah, 20 years ago, just where you're sitting now, Hans Blix, who was the UN investigator, was asked the question, were there weapons of mass destruction? Could you conclusively say that they were not there? And his answer was very interesting. It was basically, if we'd had 3 more months, we would have been able to prove that there were no weapons.
Say that again?
If there had been 3 more months, if the war hadn't been rushed through, he would have been able to prove, he felt, that there were no weapons.
Yeah, I think that's correct.
Yeah, it was a very interesting moment. But so you have all this, you take no credit. There have to be screw-ups. There have to be things that went horribly wrong, which I presume you're not going to boast about here now.
Well, I never screwed up. Trust me.
But if you look at Burma, I think we're all invested in that particular story. And it is an unmitigated disaster that has reignited itself. And the one thing you can say about the Burmese disaster at the moment is that no outside parties caused it. The Americans didn't cause it, the Chinese didn't cause it, Indians didn't, the Thais don't want it, nobody in ASEAN does. This is entirely an internal conflagration that seems to be endless. I mean, there is no obvious way out of it. And for people in the intelligence community, I mean, what does that mean? I mean, basically, you're the guys that should know the answers. I'm not blaming the CIA for what's going on in Burma, but some of these things are completely insoluble. Doesn't matter how much you know.
Well, you know, in 1939, Burma was considered the best and brightest of all the...
And the Philippines.
And if you were a medical student in Rangoon in 1939 and you passed, you could practice medicine in Britain. You know, the level was that high. Most of the world's rice was grown in Burma. Most of the teak, most of the rubies, jade, whatnot came out of Burma. And then the war came, and Burma was essentially destroyed. And then independence came, and it didn't last long because the army took over. And then it was a further downward spiral until, let's say, 89, 88, and Ne Win gave up his quest for a Burmese the path to socialism for Burma. It didn't work. But at the same time, you had, when I got to Rangoon in 94, there were 16 insurgencies active at that time in Burma. About 3 or 4 of them were major. And the only cooperation with the Burmese that we had, my watch, was on narcotics, because it was in both our interests to eradicate. And you know, at the time, and even now, the Wa on the northern border, the Shan state, they've got 30,000 men under arms. They're very well armed by the Chinese. And I made a film some years ago on opium in Burma, and going into I was under the protection of the UN counter-narcotics people, crop substitution programs. If you went in there, there's no Burmese money used, there's no Burmese flag flown. It's all Wa, controlled by the Chinese. So there's a number now, as you've seen in the last couple of years, the war has spread from the ethnics, from the Kachin, the Chin, the Arakanese, the Karen, the Mon, to ethnic Burmans. And so it's really become a civil war. And it's getting worse and worse because these the Russians and the Chinese are providing weapons, and they're bombing. You know, they're bombing temples. You know, they're bombing cities and towns. You know, Burmese towns, not ethnics. So it's really bad, and there's nobody helping the Burmese, the rebels. Okay, as we help the Khmer and whatnot. So I'm thinking that that should change.
Yeah. You should be more proactive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And that the insurgency is essentially disorganized and failing. It's never. There was a moment 2 years ago where it seemed to be doing better.
But now it's a national thing. Now it's you got to get these guys out, and they're being supported by the Russians are bringing in a lot of air, and the Chinese are bringing in a lot of weapons. So and there's nobody helping the rebels. So I think that. That should be rectified.
Interesting. Right, well, we have a microphone in the room. We have a very full house tonight, which is really nice to see. And I can safely say we have a lot of history in this room. There are a lot of people who know a lot of things. So anyway, Sebastian.
Good evening, Barry. Thank you for an interesting perambulation around the region. A couple of things I'd like to pick out from what you were saying.
Sebastian, introduce yourself.
Sorry, Sebastian Berger from AFP. Firstly, as Dominic said, we had an event recently where Horst Faas was featured heavily in his absence. Do you think that Nick Ut took the Napalm Girl photo? That's just a first question.
You know, I don't want to get into this.
Okay, fine.
I
Fair
really don't, because Faust was my buddy, Peter Arnett was my buddy, and I'm not saying I don't want to get into it.
Okay. So, secondly, you referred a couple of times to what you called the Khmer resistance against the Vietnamese puppet regime in Cambodia. That sounds to me very much like the Khmer Rouge. Obviously.
No. One thing, thank you for bringing that up. We supported two groups against the PRK, which is supported by the Vietnamese. We supported the Royalists, Sihanouk and his people, and we supported the non-Royalists under Son Sann, nationalists. We never gave anything to the Khmer Rouge. And the Khmer Rouge effectively were kicked out by the Vietnamese and never came back. Now, when we, and I say we, I mean Thailand primarily, with some American support and support from some other countries, nobody helped the Khmer Rouge. The Chinese provided a lot of material for the Khmer Rouge, including tanks and artillery. But that never made it to the Khmer Rouge thanks to the Royal Thai Army. So the Khmer Rouge were out of business by, say, 79. They weren't involved, and we certainly weren't involved with them.
Okay. And you mentioned that your job was to recruit bad people.
No, not bad people. Good people with good intelligence working for bad regimes.
You did refer to bad people. Who's the worst person who you've recruited, and in your opinion, and how did it make you feel? How did you go about it, and how did it make you feel doing that?
I mean, you mentioned a worst person?
Yeah,
The worst person you recruited.
the most
I didn't
morally
recruit any
reprehensible.
bad people. They were all good agents.
The most morally reprehensible person who you would otherwise, who other people in the circles you worked in might otherwise have wanted to arrest and put on trial.
Looking across the dozens of people that I recruited, there were a couple of crooks, but in my personal, experience, I didn't recruit any bad people, but I did recruit some good people that worked for bad regimes. If you can, that's a subjective, on my part. But no. Not that it doesn't happen, okay? It just didn't happen to me.
And last question. Of the people you can talk about, whether because they're public themselves or because they've died and it's no longer an issue, what recruitment are you proudest of?
Well, I kind of hate to say this because I did an operation with MI6 that went well. My participation was pretty minimal, okay? But it turned out to be a very good operation, so, that's good. I give full credit to the Brits for that one. I recruited a guy one time, in my first book. I talk about him as my favorite agent. This is a guy who, European, who had tremendous access to a wide variety of hard targets, whether they're terrorists, or communists, or whatever, and very dangerous. And when I recruited him, the first thing he said was, "I'm really glad you're CIA. I was afraid you might be State Department, because I was under State Department cover." And he said, and State doesn't do the things that I want to do. And he said, I do have one condition, and I thought, oh, geez, I knew it was too good to be true. What's your condition? He said, I will only accept missions that are life-threatening. Okay, now this is my kind of guy. I was an infantry officer in Vietnam, and if you got a sergeant out there that says, I want to go out and, by myself, and in fact, this happened in Vietnam with an American Indian, and he wanted to count coup, which means, anyway, we don't have enough people like that. So I recruited the guy, and he went off, and I gave him one mission that was dangerous. He was almost killed. He came back. He took a second mission. He came up on his own and said, I can go in and report on this group, and a group that I didn't know anything about. It was not in Asia. But I sent a message to headquarters, and they came back and said, hey, we've been after that group for years, but no one's ever come back alive. So no. So I went to the guy and I said, you can't go. And he says, I'm going. Whether you want to, if I live, then pay me what it's worth. And he went and he came back, okay, with the goods. So I ran, he went off on 3 or 4 missions for me. And then my tour was up and I moved on and I turned him over to somebody else. And years went by, 14 years went by, and I was at headquarters, and a guy calls me and says, are you so-and-so? And this is on our own internal secure line. And he said, did you recruit so-and-so? I said, yeah. Is he still alive? He said, yeah, not only is he still alive, we're giving him a major decoration, and he wants you to be at the ceremony. So I was there, and this guy went on, and it must have been 7 or 8 officers that ran him, and then finally he retired and gave him a decoration, which he immediately had to give back because these things are secret. And I felt really good about that guy and the fact that he lived and provided enormous amount of intelligence we wouldn't have had on really hard targets. So that's my favorite guy.
Peter Trainer, club member. I just wanted to touch on something that Dominic asked about, as the things that you don't say. In your Indochina book, it presents a very rosy, benevolent view of the CIA. There's no mention of regime change from Mossadegh in the 50s up to Maduro, rendition, Iran-Contra arms,
Okay. Right.
the Plain of Jars.
You're looking at my book, Chief. I didn't do Maduro. I didn't do that, and I didn't do that. I'm telling you what I did do.
No, but
And it's not a history book. It's a memoir.
No, the point I'm making is that the image is it's a very benevolent organization, but there's a lot of things going on in the background. I mean, there are murders, assassinations, renditions. There's a lot goes on, not that you're personally responsible for, but there is a lot that happens in the CIA. So you don't mention it. Is that because of restrictions from Langley?
No.
Or has the world perception got it wrong? It never happened.
No, I'm just saying it never happened to me.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, I've been involved in rendition. Nothing wrong with the rendition. We had a rendition in Thailand of a major drug dealer who was rendered, and boom, he went to jail. You know, in and of itself, that's not a bad thing.
But there's a lot that is, like Guantanamo. and
Well,
Abu
I'm not
Ghraib.
saying there isn't. I'm just saying it's not in my book.
Right.
Not that, I mean, I didn't participate in any of those things and leave them out, okay?
Okay, understood.
I'm just saying that maybe I got lucky.
how do you spell your name?
Hi, my name's Patty Parker. I have two questions. One is, based on your experience, what do you think is holding the relationship between Trump and Putin? And
I was hoping someone would ask that.
And secondly, under this American regime, how do you see the CIA today and in the near future?
Well, let's talk about Trump for a minute. My favorite guy. Don't quote me, and this is off the record. Trump has a very serious series of problems, starting with mental. There's a lot of problems. Now, Trump and Russia, I don't know. I've been out of the organization for 30 years. But what I'm willing to believe, and I have friends, not in the agency, who believe that Trump has been compromised by the Russians. He's been the Russians, KGB, and their successors, they have their own criteria for how they view people working for them, assets. CIA has their own view, whether you can be a witting, cooperative person. Basically, they know who you are and they want to help, but there's no control. Then there's people that are really good, proven agents who've been polygraphed, all their information checks out. These are your stars. The Russians have a classification in which one of the where Trump falls into is useful idiots. Okay, I mean that's what they call it. And Trump started probably with them in the 80s because he was a New Yorker. There was a lot of Russians in New York, a lot of Russian sympathetic to KGB, and a lot of criminals. The Russian mafia was active and is active in the United States and controlled largely or in cooperation with Russian intelligence. So these are the people that I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect Trump got involved with as a money launderer, okay? This whole thing with sex and whatnot, that just, you've seen the gross things that Trump has said about women and this and that, and his buddy Epstein, and we don't know the full details, but we probably will too. None of this has anything to do with the CIA, I assure you, and we don't report on it because we don't report on Americans. I'm giving you a personal opinion here, but he was working with them. His code name in his KGB dossier was Krasnov. That's how they referred to him. So he's a witting collaborator for them. Now that was then, and now is now, and I think that Putin. I think he's kind of a wannabe Putin. He'd like to be authoritarian and autocratic and not have to deal with laws and regulations. And it's a problem. It's a problem for the United States, and it's a problem for NATO. It's a big problem for Ukraine, and I hope it gets resolved, but not by the CIA. That's not what they do. Ah, well, that's another option. Well, I mean, look at the guy that took 3 rounds 2 days ago. Well, like I say, that's not what the CIA does.
Well, you just said you deal in foreign agencies. You don't deal in domestic issues. So why can't you take up Putin?
Well, we're not at war with Russia. If we were, we could blow them out.
different to what
All right,
I
all right, we've got,
We're totally at war with Russia.
we have people waiting to ask questions, so
Well, sorry.
it's all right. I'll
sorry,
forgive you.
there
The
There was one-
microphone's over there.
There was one question. How do you see the future of the CIA?
What about him?
Do you see it as being compromised under this administration?
No, he's got his own, he's got big problems. He planned to be in Kiev in H plus 72 hours, okay? It didn't happen. He can't get off the tiger. That's his problem. You know, he can't surrender. They'll kill him. He's got bigger problems than Trump.
Yeah, Steve Parker. I'd like to give an anecdote that might be interesting to you and then ask you a question. As you know, the U.S. Normalized economic relations with Vietnam in 2000 and 2001. And we had the opportunity to come in and have the USAID project that helped them implement the changes for them to meet the requirements by a bilateral trade agreement that was this thick in the WTO session. And that partly led to the economic growth that was going on in Vietnam, and the U.S. played a very major role in that. So we were the first AID project to be there since 1975. So we had to develop trust and working relationships. But it's interesting because we would get feedback and say, oh, well, we thought you might be the CIA, but we can handle the CIA. But we're really worried if you're related to the USTR. At that stage, they were much more nervous about the trade negotiators than they were the CIA. So I don't know if that was interesting to you, but it was interesting to me. But I'd like to go back to your issues about Cambodia because it's something I've never understood about U.S. foreign policy. And I think some has come out in terms of documents, but my casual understanding is that in 1979 we resisted the Vietnamese going in to push Pol Pot out in tandem with the Chinese, and basically we're supporting the Pol Pot regime by trying to resist the Vietnamese to go in and do it and move them out. And the Vietnamese did it, and then they had to walk home in 89 to get home. What is it I don't understand in that process? It seems like a very bad element of U.S. foreign policy to basically not want to go in and get rid of Pol Pot.
Well, I'm not going to argue with you. I mean, Pol Pot was a bad guy, and I'm glad he's dead. But going back to the agency doesn't make policy. We obey and follow policy. And I don't believe that the agency did, or the government did anything to help the Khmer Rouge.
Well, you said you were on the desk and involved with Cambodia during that time. I mean, we came out very strongly against the Vietnamese going into Cambodia. And that implicitly means that if they didn't go in, Pol Pot was going to continue.
Yeah, well, you know,
is there more than I
was
don't
in
understand?
Bangkok when that all happened, and I was talking to a Vietnamese official, and I thanked him, okay, for going in. And but again, that's a policy issue, and maybe we shouldn't have done it. I was happy, you know. I've always been against the Khmer Rouge, and so it was unfortunate that I think that was unfortunate. The way I put it was, thanks for going in. When you're going to leave? Because their plan was to take it over, and they put the PRK in government, and we had to push them out, and that happened in '91, and then free and fair elections were held, and that worked out. It worked out for a while until Hun Sen made a coup d'etat. Okay. Yes.
Jim Wolf?
Hi, Jim Wolf, formerly of AFP and Reuters. I wanted to circle back to where you started with your conviction that Jim Thompson was killed by the Communist Party of Malaya, or Malaysia, as you said. Well, anyway, I wonder what exactly are you relying on for that determination, that conclusion, and why do you think, what do you think their motive was?
Okay, is Kun Suicha here tonight? Too bad. Because Kun Suicha was one of the sources for the film that we did on who killed Jim Thompson. And we had two sources. And one was a deathbed confession of a senior Malayan communist who said that Jim Thompson was assassinated on Easter Day, 1967, in the Cameron Highlands. And then we had a second source that said that Jim Thompson was trying to get to China to help his old friend Pridi Panamyong. And when it came to the attention of the Malayan communists, who were quite powerful in the Cameron Highlands, they looked into Jim Thompson, who he was, found out that he'd been an OSS officer, although never a CIA officer, and made a decision locally in the Camerons to kill him because they didn't have communications with their headquarters in China. So we had two sources that said they killed him. One was a senior communist, and so, and when I sat here with Dominic in 2017, we threw it out, and I was waiting for questions like that. But we had the two sources sitting right here answering questions.
Did you have much reaction, official reaction or otherwise, in response to your piece?
Well, no one said they didn't believe it, and said, you know, we had two sources. What I really would have liked to have is the third source saying why Pridi invited Jim to go to China or to help him get out of China. Now, I was in Paris in the 80s, and Pridi was in Paris. So Pridi did get out, excuse me.
Pridi
did get out of China. He died in Paris, and in fact, I met him a couple times, and I was interested only in his wartime activities, because Pridi, former Prime Minister of Thailand in 1944, was an asset of OSS and Force 136 operating against the Japanese. And a personal friend of Jim Thompson, who was an OSS officer in Bangkok right at the end of the war. And then when the war ended, so ended OSS. The U.S. Army wanted them gone. And Jim left government service and never came back.
Who did you just say wanted him gone?
Say again?
I just want to make sure that I understand the last thing you said about the U.S. Army wanted Jim Thompson gone?
No, they wanted the OSS gone.
Ah,
okay?
yeah.
They never wanted, FDR set up the OSS at the suggestion of Winston Churchill. And the U.S. Army never wanted them, they were detracting from the Army's role. They didn't like the OSS. General MacArthur didn't allow OSS to operate in his whole sphere of, South Pacific.
Thank you.
And the OSS did, they were gone just in a matter of weeks.
Jim, you can find that program on FCCT Events on YouTube, so you can watch the whole thing. Teddy.
Teddy Sapapalazatian. Nice to talk to you again, Barry. The last time we talked was exactly 30 years ago. Lovely to talk to you again. Simple question. I like your description of recruitment. You've never recruited me. I'm very sad that you never approached me, but that's another story. You could have approached me and I would have said yes. Anyway, I love your recruitment story, and you said that normally your recruits had personal reasons, like how much you're going to pay me, are you going to pay for the education of my children, I want to escape from my country, all those sort of things. And always, of course, money is the issue. Simple question, how much money? Did you pay them billions, millions, or a few thousands, or was it in dollars, or in rubles, or in baht? That's the first question. The second question, and it's an easier one, what are the criterion that you have to recruit? Do you recognize a guy from afar and says, oh, that's a perfect recruit, I'm going to go after him? And that's probably the reason why you saw me both near and far and never recruited me. That's another story. But it's interesting how methods of recruitment, apart from offering freedom and money and all the rest of it. Surely there are some recruits who hated their own regime, for example. So I'm going to leave this.
One at a time here, Teddy. The money, we all have budgets. So we give them as little as we have to.
But, I'm glad you didn't hire me then.
But that isn't to say I've given, I remember passing $360,000 to an asset one night, and that was just part of what he got. So it depends what you got to give. You got me. Take a number, I'll be with you a little later. Now on your other question, a lot of the best agents that we get are walk-ins. Okay, we don't search them out. They come to us, and they have reasons, and very often it's not money. Okay, when Americans spy for the other side, it's usually money. They've got problems, and they want to be rich, and it's a problem. But a lot of the people that come to us do it because they hate the regime. I knew a Soviet. I worked a Soviet case years ago, and the guy who didn't get recruited, but that was only because he didn't really have access to the kind of information we wanted. We could have had him, but he didn't have much to give us. But his father was killed on the Gulag, and other reasons. He was actually an ethnic Ukrainian, not a Russian. So there's a lot of really good people that come across at risk of their own lives, and sometimes they die. But money often isn't the main reason.
Question?
Hi, just two questions. My name is David Shanks. I'm an FCCT admirer. I'm not a member. I have two questions. One, I'm a big spy fic fan, and I'm interested in your books. But I'm wondering, can you share with us the name of the spy fic writer, author that you most admire?
That's a good question. I don't read this genre, okay? Having said that, there are two people I really, really respect. And one is John le Carré, because this really is literature more than, spy fiction. It's really cerebral stuff. Having said that, I beat him at a game of darts one time, and so I kind of feel sorry for the guy. The other is American named First. Do you know this name?
No.
Okay. He's from Seattle. Well, I knew him in Seattle years ago when I was in college. But he writes these really, really good books that deal with, the niches that aren't covered by other people. It doesn't get involved in the CIA, KGB stuff. He writes books about, 1938 in Europe, and we've got, the Nazis doing this and that. And it take place in places like Bulgaria and Hungary, but very, very good stuff. And it's good historic fiction. Forget his first name, but it's F-U-R-S-T. Who knows, anybody know who I'm talking about here? He's a hell of a good writer. It's very, very interesting stuff. And for instance, one of his books takes place in the Spanish Civil War, 37, 38. You get the KNVD, precursors to KGB. Really brilliant stuff. and it's not touched. I don't follow the genre, but I'm really entertained and informed when I read this guy's stuff. So those are two names. Now, John le Carré, he was great early on, okay, when we're talking George Smiley kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But then he kind of drifted off in writing. I just didn't track a lot of his more later stuff. But when he was doing, John le Carré had been in both 5 and 6. MI5 is internal at FBI. MI6 is external at CIA. He worked for both of them, but never as an ops officer. He was sort of a support person or linguist. He was a German linguist. But he had the experience, and then he had this great imagination to create these characters, and so those are the guys I really like.
Well, thanks very much. I'm a big Le Carré fan, and I'll look up first for sure.
His son is writing. He's following his father's footsteps, but again, he got away from intelligence and the classic stuff. The other thing is with the George Smiley things, this is England playing defense. They're catching the moles. They're not out there recruiting. They're trying to find the guys. And so that's kind of sad. And that's one of the things when I was talking to him, we didn't get involved in his writing or this and that. It was a fairly short, it was in Cambodia during the war. He was out researching a book. But, he has this kind of a sad history about, Britain was badly damaged by the Cambridge Five, and that's what this is all about.
My second question, I'm a Canadian on the run from winter here, and I couldn't leave the mic without asking you, from your experience and your estimation, with the current president's attitudes towards my country, would you say that there is very likely and I guess more agents being recruited and run by the CIA in Canada now than before Trump became president?
Okay. I've been out of government a long time. My grandfather is from Prince Edward Island, okay? And he went out to the gold rush in '98, and my mother was born in Vancouver. So I'm pro-Canadians.
You've got skin in the game.
There are the CIA, and I'm saying this with some authority, there are no Canadians being recruited by the CIA, okay? Which isn't to say that there aren't some Canadians volunteering. But I also think that there's probably some Canadians who are volunteering who aren't being accepted because we don't spy on Canada. And that includes with this guy in the White House right now, okay? We don't do that. We didn't do it in my watch, and I'm sure it's not being done now. And if someone were to say do it, let's say Trump says do it, the people would tell the world what he was doing. And so don't worry about Trump. We'll worry about Trump. My son is a graphic designer, and he designed a T-shirt that he gave me just for fun. It's a map of North America, and there's Canada, and south of it is Baja Canada, okay? And below that is the Canadian Sea, or okay? And he gave it to me, and I'm waiting to give it to somebody else, but we'll see how it goes.
Well, thanks for that, Barry. I appreciate your optimism. A CIA optimist. That's great. Thanks again.
Right, I think we're moving towards the end of the evening. Just two quickies. Which two US presidents did you like least?
Well, Millard Fillmore was a son of a bitch, okay?
Who?
The 13th president.
Oh, all right. No, but
you mean
on your watch?
Oh, on my watch.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, I don't have anything against Millard, but we had a lot of marginal presidents, and we have the most marginal one right now. But on my watch, I have to say that, and I don't belong to either party. I'm an independent. although I'm having said that, I have to tell you what Will Rogers, American humorist, said, and he said, "I don't belong to an organized party. I'm a Democrat." Okay. That was true then. It could be true now. But having said that, the two presidents that did more damage to the agency when I was in the agency would be our peanut farmer from Georgia, who was really a decent guy, probably, but he didn't like the agency. And he kicked out, I'm told, 700 officers in a big bloodbath, and which, you know, just destroyed tens of thousands of years of experience and language skills and whatnot. So that's Jimmy Carter.
Right.
The second one would be Bill Clinton, who for some reason didn't think that HUMINT was a good thing. HUMINT being human-sourced information from spies. You know, there's a lot of ways of gathering information. ELINT, you know, electronic, you know, picking up, breaking codes, this kind of stuff. But really, you got to have spies if you're going to get intentions. If they're going to come across the border, and the Politburo says, you know, it's going to happen in 10 days, and we have an asset in the Politburo, it's really good to have these people. And Bill Clinton didn't agree with that.
Good, right, well, thank you. The reason we're having this program is actually because Dennis Gray, who was sitting here somewhere around, has completed his memoir of his career as a foreign correspondent in this part of the world, and a lot of it is about his time in Cambodia in the early 70s, right up to the fall of Phnom Penh in April 75, when he was the bureau chief at Associated Press. And it's a hell of a story. So that will be coming. It's been delayed because of distribution problems, but we'll probably have that program on the 1st of April. And so that's something to put in your calendar. I was comparing notes today with Barry, and I've never really met you that I can recall operationally.
Well, in 2017, we sat here together.
Well, that's different. I mean, that's the club. That was the Jim Thompson program.
Right.
But anyway, we were having a chat, and I suddenly realised I had met him. And it was in '92 May, during what happened was that there'd been demonstrations in Bangkok for about 6 weeks that just would not resolve themselves. And the press corps were exhausted. And we were out there on a Sunday and decided nothing was going to happen. So we moved into the Royal Hotel to have dinner. And I was with Paul Handley, and we were then joined by Nate Sayer, who came to the table, who was accompanied by an American individual who I'd never met before. And we've worked out today that that was in fact Barry Broman. And what happened that evening was that the Chamlong Srimong moved the crowd. Finally, he made his move and took them up to Panfar Bridge along Mojdamnon. And this was decisive, and there was all hell broke loose. I mean, people got killed during that thing. And somebody ran into the restaurant and shouted, it was almost like a Monty Python moment, "He's moved the crowd." Nate Thayer and Barry Broman were out there like a shot and left me and Paul Handley with the bill. So,
that's $400 you'll never see
it's
again.
only today at lunchtime I find it was you. I mean, I looked at a picture of a much younger Barry, and that's the guy who ran out of the restaurant.
That was
But
me.
you know, they're trained for quick reactions. Slow coaches like me were late getting
Once a
beaten up.
newsman, always a newsman.
Yeah. But Nate ran out of there. He got very, very badly thumped in a police baton charge. And
Right.
the police were completely panicked. They couldn't control anything. And Nate got beaten up very badly, not at Panfar Bridge, but the bridge next to it. And he lost the AP telephone. which was one of these great Motorola bricks, and that went into the clock.
I took the picture with him on the phone. It's in the book I gave you.
All right, well, I'll look at it with interest.
Okay.
But anyway, so there was a connection after all.
Yep.
Anyway,
now,
look.
this is supposed to be a book signing. I brought some books. I hope somebody bought some because I'm here to sign them if you bought a book. Bring it up. Is that how you want to do that?
You've got one, have you?
Okay.
Good. On the counter at the front. Call the girl. So anyway, on that note, thank you very much for coming. Barry, thank you for a very engaging evening. A glimpse into another world.
Okay.
Oh, thank you.